Hi there, Chris from Airwindows, doing my Q&A session, and let me set up my live chat and that kind of stuff. I'm still full with some of my things here a little bit. Boop. Over here, and oh, there you are, it's you. Give you slightly larger letters and stretch it out a little bit. And set it to live chat rather than top chat. And I should probably turn up my gain a little bit. How's this? I do have compression going, but I'm just sort of, yeah, if this works, that's actually, oh wait, I know what's happening. So, how's this then? Getting the volume levels right. I'm doing pretty good on the whole. It's going to be an interesting day for live chat. I'm not exactly sure what's going on. I think we're probably all a little bit distracted. I certainly am. I had some family obligations of a sort, and so I was out visiting a brother on, not the programmer one though, on Sunday, which was interesting. My brother has a friend who is apparently a big pothead and was like, oh, is that okay? But didn't tell me, like, oh, my friend is smoking lots of dope in the house, in the room that you're going to be in. I never thought of that because, like, my brother doesn't smoke, or doesn't smoke cigarettes anyhow. So I was kind of along the lines of, okay, fine. But if he was like, oh, hey, my friend's doing bong hits in the room you're going to be in, I would have been like, oh, okay, I'm not coming. So that might change things a little bit going forwards. I'm not sure. He doesn't watch these videos or pay any attention to anything that I do, so no harm done mentioning it, I guess. But yeah, and that's just me being a recovering addict and needing to not be hanging around stuff. I mean, that was one of my drugs of choice, so I'm not going to fool around with it. I have a slightly ripped piece of paper here. Interesting. Well, now it's completely ripped. Ha, ha, ha. So, yeah, it's time to settle in. I have a appointment today with a guy who's a case manager because I get like some help for my autism stuff. I'm going to be talking with the therapist about the sorts of things that went on Saturday, because it's interesting, but some of it is actually too personal to bring up in a chat. But I was calling this guy and being like, oh, hey, don't come. I'm going to cancel. We will check in or whatever. I'm fine. I'm feeling well, but this is not a time to like come for just a little social type visit. So that's not going to happen. And then I called him up on his cell phone to sort of underscore the point. And it was like, oh yeah, I was going to call you because HR called me and said stay home for a couple of weeks. And I was like, okay, cool, we're on the same page. Good, be well. And hopefully he will. This is a good person. And we're all kind of buckling in. I have been like patiently buying up, like a couple of weeks ago, I got an extra sack of rice. I ended up getting, let me see, 6, 12, 18 cans of soup rather than the usual 6 or 12 that I would normally have. I didn't get any toilet paper, but I got extra paper towels because that was available, and I wasn't actually running out super hard, so it's like, whatever, that's just a foolishness. And I'm wondering, oh, by the way, this is not coffee. This is really strong ginger tea. So yay for my chat for advising me to get into that, because it is really quite good. I actually put a little cayenne in this. And I've also thought of getting some saffron, just so that the ginger tea would be a much brighter yellow color. And yeah, I have got a whole bunch of sort of finely chopped ginger, and that's what I'm making the tea out of. And it doesn't have any sugar to go along with it, although I do still have more of the ginger medallions because they're yummy and they're also ginger. But that's not what the tea gets made out of. And yeah, it's like, as a introvert recluse, it's like, my life has been leading up to this moment. Oh my God, everything is going to go so well. And it's funny because it's like, it's true, but it's not me at my best. I'm actually thinking about asking you folks, do you want me to hang out at other times other than just the Monday, and then I'll do some jams, which are not very communicative, but I'm doing the music. And I'm going to stick with the doing a ambient jam on Wednesdays, because I just like the way that it worked out, and I like the fact that it has me patching and repatching stuff. So it keeps things moving rather than letting it sit in a consistent state. And I've been building things up to the point, and you can see an hour 39. I'm going to take a moment to say, not that it's likely to apply to anybody in my chat, if anybody does need to drop off the Patreon, you really should. People reacted oppositely and got on the Patreon more. So it's like, yes, I get that I'm doing ambient music for you now and I'm being very helpful and stuff, but okay. More than ever, I'm not hurt and things are not going badly with this for me. So if you need to take care of yourself, you totally and seriously should do that. It'll be fine, I promise. Worst that'll happen is, like, instead of committing to an hour 39, I'll be committing to, like, an hour 30 or an hour 20. It still weirds me out that happens, but yeah, and yeah, the thing about the hang stream, and this is what I'm asking about, is I'm still leaving that at Wednesday because me and my friends who do that arranged that it was going to be Wednesday, so we're going to keep it that way. But if anybody wants to hang out not on one of these days, drop me a line and I can just kind of go live, because if there's ever a time when it's useful for me to be able to be this kind of nerd who can just sort of isolate and socialize with people on the internet and stuff, well, now I have a nice camera and stuff. I even got, and you'll be seeing this in the music streams, is these lenses got really cheap compared to how they started out a number of years ago when they came out. I got a SLR Magic lens, and it is a Cine 3, which means that the aperture here is smoothly rotating. It doesn't have detents or stops, so you can change the size of it. I'm not sure if you can see that, but and it's a very cool aperture. There's a lot of little blades on this aperture, so it has what they call extremely good bokeh. Oh, I wonder if maybe you can see it better if I let light through. What does this look like now? And the purpose of this is so that I can do the music jams with my special lighting rather than with like bright studio lighting. I need to have those flashing colors and the extremely intensely colored light. I actually got to put up some shades on the windows as well, which are better. I first did the mistake shades. I got ones that weren't long enough, so I put that in my front door and also blocked off my kitchen with another shade that I can put down. The result being that if I do end up doing more in the way of these music jams and things with my colorful lights, I can produce a more extreme effect that way. David. Yeah, Ahmed, that has to be arranged more carefully. You can't just go do a 10-hour live stream, because it's like, I could do that, but there might not be a lot of people there to see it, and that's fine. But the thing is, I could show up and stream for you guys a little bit more, seeing as this is a super appropriate time for that. Because it literally is true that people are in lockdown. This is a difficult situation, and there's going to be times when I can spend time. I mean, to an extent, with the like stuff going on, I actually need isolation time to recuperate. I need to have a certain amount of time with not that much going on, and that is how I get stuff like the doing the blinds, having it so that my lighting situation is better, setting up the camera, rearranging, like the studio stuff there is pretty heavily rearranged now, because it's now quite thoroughly full, almost thoroughly full, of all manner of stuff in there. But now I'm looking at it going like, how can I add more? But the thing about it is that involves shuffling and revising stuff. And if I am chilling out and just kind of hanging, taking time for myself, that's when I'll do that sort of maintenance stuff. Ahmed, yes, there's a bear named Corona. It's been a running gag for weeks. Man, ginger tea with a little bit of cayenne added is awesome. It's a little painful. It has some spicy stuff, but it is super awesome. This is very good. So yeah, I'm gonna grab some of my notes and things, not counting the little bit of grab. Oh no! I have a bunch of little panes of graph paper, all of which are slightly torn. Ah, what a terrible fate. It must be destroyed. I'm not sure what happened. Somehow something sliced a whole package of this stuff. Not a whole package of this stuff, but a fairly large amount. I feel there's like no purpose for having cards and things unless they're not already sliced and ripped and torn, so that's kind of lame. That is a small number of cards to be discarded, or indeed I can just use those to draw on today if I draw anything. Or make more temporary notes of whatever. But yeah, grabbing my microphone, which keeps getting scrunched into different places. Oh, Lorenzo, thank you. Lorenzo shows up in chat, says, hi, thank you for your awesome work. Yeah, cayenne is good for food seasoning as well, believe me. So, we're going to hang out for, gosh, another hour and a bunch of minutes. So, what should we talk about? I know that I recently did a Evergreens, which is by request for some folks. And the Evergreens, I suppose it had some things to do with guitar miking. People keep being interested in having me do rock stuff. And I tend to resist, but I probably shouldn't always resist because there's aspects of that interest me. And I do always include guitar in my music, just not necessarily rock style. So, yeah, that could work. Oh, this microphone keeps poking me in funny ways. It'll be fine. Yeah, the Evergreen Let It Bleed went out, and I finally got that done, and it was interesting. It was interesting because it's like after going and visiting family and stuff like that, it was like 5 hours of work making that Evergreens, from just setting everything up and doing a little background recording and little background research, finding out things like the Helios priest and stuff, which gave me more things to talk about, and that's good. That is definitely a plus. I had some people quickly reacting like, "Oh, looking forward to the germanium thing, dude," and I was like, I actually haven't made that yet, but I bet it's going to happen. The thing about the way that console and the way that recording worked is, if you know what you're listening for, it's really pretty easy to tell that some of the stuff in there is having its spiky bits clipped off, but it's being clipped off by these old germanium circuits, which are really, like, there was a picture that I found in my researches where I saw the circuit board from one of the old Helios consoles and a amplifier card, and it really reminded me a lot of the old Moog stuff. It's this big old epoxy circuit board, and the traces were probably, I don't know, 8 to 16 times the effective wire gauge as modern printed circuit traces. And I'm not talking tiny printed circuit traces. I mean fairly high-end and well, like the current Helios gear, because that's how I saw it. It was a picture of the circuit board and a picture of the more miniaturized current circuit board, which is still quite serviceable. And that was not using pitiful little circuit traces, but all the same, the older one clearly had like 8 to 16 times the circuit trace material, and had hundreds of times the amount of space between the traces on the board. The board was enormous. It was much larger, and all the traces were being run neatly away from the other traces, so none of the traces were being run like right next to each other or anything like that. And it was really old school. It was the sort of thing which I thought was very well designed. So that's also part of how the sound of it works out, is this old stuff was being done in such a way where the energy can come through the circuit pretty undiminished, but at the same time there is that clipping behavior. And the reason I know that that's a thing is because they had to revise the more recent reissue, and that's why they were showing the circuit boards and stuff. It's like, oh, and this is the revision, because we needed to revise it so that it had more headroom, because people are finding it completely unworkable the way that it is, because they're not used to having anything show this little headroom. And That's a really interesting revelation, especially when we're talking about a germanium circuit. You talk about this classic mixing board circuit, and they're like, we did it exactly the way that we did, and then we had to change it because it clips too easily and is all made out of antique parts and germanium transistors. It's like, you're missing a trick there. So I think it's very likely that I'll have something turn up, whatever it might be, that's going to learn from that stuff. I should talk about guitar making at some point. I'm going to jump in also and be like, Ahmed, you can continue to ask for anything that you want out of my music performances as long as you're happy to accept the answer, nah. Because I get contrary. You demand something of me and I'll do the opposite. And then if you try to use reverse psychology, it's probably not going to work. And it's not really up to me. It is like, I got to play what's coming through. Plus, I'm working with a synthesizer system that is generating its own, like, you could be like, oh, play something happy and bright. Meanwhile, the synthesizer system has decided randomly to start playing a series of chords that are very moody and funky. And my performance and behavior has to go along with that. It's no longer just only about me. With the stuff I have on all the Turing machines and such, that synthesizer does actually play itself. It's not only about me controlling it. It is also about where its randomness is going and what it is getting the system to do. And I'm constantly trying to learn to develop it more so that it is even more developing that kind of stuff. Let's move around some of these things again. Much like this. Also, one of the things about when Ahmed, when you say funk, it's challenging because my experience of funk is like Parliament Funkadelic, James Brown, the Meters. I would count Robert Palmer in there as well. He's worked with some exceptional musicians and is a very funky dude on his own. And I'm not that good. Like, I can try real hard, but my sense of like what counts as acceptable for if you're actually doing funk guitar or if you're actually doing funk bass is rests on these experiences, these listening things. I could do an Evergreens about those at some point, although it's going to be a while before I do another. But my sense of what funk means comes from that. I am not that good a musician to be able to do that. It is hard to do. So it's nice being ambitious. It's nice trying stuff like that, but there's going to be a certain limit to it simply because I'm never going to try to launch myself into and constantly do stuff that's not really, it's my ability level is not representing that. It is not representing the ability to do serious funk guitar and keep it going, or funk bass in any kind of sense. So yeah, Groove Q, that's cool because I'm a fan of Blue and Talking Heads, although I don't know Underworld. Maybe I should check them out. Them or it or whatever. And Ahmed, yeah, you can keep demanding things as much as you want and as vociferously as you want, as long as I get to go, nah. And we can make a joke out of it, or I can get cranky and take it seriously or whatever. But basically that's how it works. It's like, that's almost never going to be productive. It's only going to be just like, okay, you set off a firework. You threw a flower at me and the flower goes, oh, color, thing. And it doesn't necessarily have an effect. And if it does, it's not necessarily the effect that you had in mind. But it's like, yeah, okay. Ooh, Bootsy is the James Brown and Parliament Funkadelic bass player, which is quite an amazing thing. I mean, talk about a track record. It's astonishing. James Brown, Sex Machine, Bootsy Collins on bass. And yeah, I admire that stuff enormously, but one of the reasons I'm drawn to like techno is because I can design stuff and fiddle with the timing of things until it sits in sort of a techno version of what would be very funky. But it doesn't require my human abilities to be as funky as that, just to have a certain degree of taste. And I also have license to do stuff that is not funky if I wish. You know, like I become Sir Knows a lot, devoid of funk, and throw in some, you know, like in the Frank Zappa thing where you do the incredible music performance and then you throw in the cheesy country western song. Like, I can do things that have very funky elements and then also throw in something that makes no sense in that context whatsoever. Just for fun, just because why not? And yeah. I don't have the appropriate James Brown album. I do have Mothership Connection. So I could conceivably do a Parliament Mothership Connection evergreen. Nothing is happening in that line for a while. I need to do a bunch of more plugins for a while. But now you see that occasionally there will be another evergreen. And you get to hear the stuff off of the original vinyl, or at least old vinyl, and in a way where it gets communicated fairly well. But I'm going to repeat, I don't have the appropriate James Brown. I would like to. I would like to have James Brown records of that nature, but I don't. I've got like one or two. They're not the best of examples. Like I think one is too old and the other one is too young. And it would need to be certain other albums, and they would be very expensive to acquire. The Mothership Connection album is not in perfect shape, and I'm pretty sure that one of the better tracks, you know, like P-Funk, for example, has a skip. And part of the reason is that that's a Casablanca record, and it was cut really hot. So the Parliament Funkadelic drums are very heavily damped, but they're playing the crap out of them. And there are a few kinds of music that are more capable of putting across incredibly high peak energy. Like the whole design of how the sounds are mixed and constructed is just all peak energy that's gone almost instantly. The damping is extremely heavy, the rooms are really dead unless there's special effects. That colors the way that I mix, by the way. And the as a result, it's kind of easy for those records to skip. It's kind of easy for them to be like, and the bass and the guitar, and there's the needle over there in the next track, because the peak energy is so huge that it's really trying to fling the needle into the adjacent groove quite hard. So that's a challenge. That's a challenge. You wind up getting skips that can't be unskipped because they are tied into what the actual groove of the record is doing. And if you've gone over the edge into the adjacent groove too many times, that's the new shape of the groove because it gets worn in there. I do know some things about Talking Heads too. And I do have some of those great Talking Heads albums. Not literally all of them, but I grew up with Fear of Music, Remain in Light, Speaking in Tongues, and that was sort of that's the sort of run of Talking Heads that I had, and huge effect. Like I was playing those until the grooves fell off back when I was still getting stoned. I was really into like the combination of the rhythms and the crazy effects, and you had Adrian Belew in there, and you had, oh God, I should know his name. Bernie Worrell, Parliament Funkadelic keyboard player, and he was in there as well, and it's just the most amazing group. And interestingly, you have Tina Weymouth, and she's another. I was talking about the Fender Mustang bass and how it has a special sound to it, and that Bill Wyman played a Mustang bass. Tina Weymouth played a Mustang bass too, a bunch of different people. I've already done a Evergreens on Devo's Duty Now for the Future. I have about 4 or 5 of their, oh no, not 5. I have like 4 of their records, I think. And I consider Duty Now to the Future to be their crowning achievement, although it's a little bit obscure compared to things like, oh God, whatever the one that Whip It is on. Heresy is an interesting point. Do I have a plugin that can boost or cut just one side of the waveform polarity? Technically, single-ended triode can distort one end of the waveform specifically. I'm not sure if I have anything that boosts one side exactly. Single-ended triode will cut, and also Purist Worm, although it does it in slightly a weird way, specifically saturates and cuts one side or the other. Yeah, I believe that I have that as well, but Duty Now for the Future is the superior album. It is extraordinarily good. So Infinity has an intelligent synthetic question. Is there any way to increase dynamic range without increasing the number of bits? I'm not exactly familiar with what the Oxford Inflator does. That's going to be one of Paul Frindle's things, and he's a very clever guy. And if you increase dynamic range without increasing the number of bits, what you're doing is changing the transfer function. You're making stuff more distorted or saturated or more anti-saturated, like using console bus by itself without a console channel with it. And that is increasing dynamic range while having the same amount of information in there. Gone on the Red Eye Express, yeah. Hey, Bo. Yep, did the new Evergreens. Also, an interesting thing that I've been thinking about in recent weeks is as much as I was cranky with you guys for suggesting it, a month ago when I went to which I did not do this last Saturday, by the way. I didn't go to the second Saturday Synth Fest this last Saturday because it just seemed like a bad idea. But the time that I went there and gave myself hypothermia and got deathly ill, I wonder whether maybe there was coronavirus going around there and I just weakened myself to the point of getting it, because all of the things about that were very similar. And this is one of the reasons why I'm kind of quarantining myself. I can't test myself or anything. All I can do is make sure that I'm not coughing on anybody and get better and stay better as well as I can. But I feel like I have kind of been struggling health-wise more than usual, and part of it is just allergy season and stuff going on. But I feel like part of it is that I got really sick with whatever I got really sick with, and then I fought it off, and I'm not sure how thoroughly I can shake that off. So this is exactly the right time for me to be like holing up somewhere and just making live streams and stuff and working on my stuff, because I got well enough to where I'm not in any danger and nothing bad is happening to me. But I'm finding that I still have to like eat properly. There was a couple of times when I like made myself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich because they're delicious, but I shouldn't really be eating wheat. I'm kind of allergic to it, although I can get away with it. David, you have to re-ask the question if I missed it. The last I see there is inflator works fine in loud signals. And Heybo. So I made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich with bread and ate that, and then just felt as sick as a dog to the point where I was wanting to throw up. And part of it is because I should not be eating lots of bread when, I am somewhat allergic to gluten and stuff like that. But I think it is also playing into the fact that my wellness is not that great. Don't tease David. That's a reasonable question. I don't know what he meant. I should scroll. Got frickin' 20 people here. I might as well attempt to find what it was. Inflator, nope. Let's go up and more. Oh, and another question about the question. No shoutouts to my NIM. Oh, you were asking what were my last 4 plugin releases? Dude, my website is right there. They go down the side of the I don't remember what my last 4 plugin releases. That's probably why I didn't say anything about it. But Airwindows.com has a list of all of the releases going down the left side. So man, it's in chronological order. It's like literally right there in the website. And maybe partly because it's literally right there on the website, I literally don't remember what it was that I've done most recently. I know that I just did a Evergreens, and I know that I just put out Luxor. Beyond that, I don't really know. So I wouldn't call that an ignore so much as like, what is this, a quiz? No, I don't remember what I just did because I'm doing what I'm just doing. And one of the challenges that I'm going to have, is that I'm going to get scattered like that. And I'll be more scattered if things are going well, or if I'm getting very inspired and like catching lots of inspirations or whatever my muse is throwing at me. That's going to make me more scattered rather than less. So me not remembering what I did yesterday is actually good rather than bad. Electric Owl Works is asking about something and asking if I did it. An algorithm to synthesize stuff removed from lossy formats. No, I have. That's not really possible. And that's also nothing that I've done. Although, I mean, when you say something that sounds like, depending upon how you define sounds like, I guess it's possible because you're not saying you get it back, you're saying fake something. So, you can't really put back stuff that's subtracted. There is something indispensable that gets lost. And this is why it's interesting. Yeah, I know I should bug my brother about it. He is wanting to come out again, which may not be the smartest thing. On the other hand, one thing about this brother of mine is he is even more socially isolated than I am. So if you ever wanted to imagine somebody who could come and visit you and not touch you or shake your hand or give you a hug, it would be this guy. He can't tell like what clothing I'm wearing. I could be wearing clothing backwards or like shave completely and it doesn't register with him. He doesn't see any of those things. He doesn't reach out and touch anybody ever. So as long as I'm not coughing at him, he was like, I don't know why you thought that maybe when you got really sick it was coronavirus, because we just went down to visit my sister after that, and then you came and visited me in my place after that, and nothing happened. And I was like, yeah, because I shook off being sick like that, and I was being very rigorous about not coughing at anybody or touching things needlessly and stuff. I was doing that on purpose. What are the new plugins for upcoming weeks? I'm not going to tell you. It'll be a surprise, especially if I do anything new. Like if I come up with any inspiration for something that's particularly cool, that would be good. And so, yeah, best case scenario is I don't know. Best case scenario is I'm not even aware of what I'm going to be doing for the upcoming weeks, because I'll get some great idea and then I'll scramble and I'll suddenly do it. So, worst case scenario is like, oh yeah, I'm going to be doing this for the next 3 months and be able to tell you everything, because that rules out the possibility of inspiration. It rules out the possibility of anything good coming along. So, yeah. Hopefully I don't know. Love my wacky chat. You guys are... Oh, I know you're going to say it. I have the funnest chat ever. I want you all to take care of yourselves now, because we don't want to lose any of you, or drastically inconvenience any of you, or end up having you guys like getting your grandma sick or whatever. See, my grandparents have already passed away. My parents have already passed away, so it's like, yeah, they missed this one. Probably wouldn't have done them a lot of good. Probably would not have been a great thing. So let's make some notes about, tell you what, I'm going to actually take off this mic for a second and go and get my pen. And come right back. Because I think this is a fine time. 11:42. We've got just about an hour or so left to talk about guitar miking. Oh, Oliver, why thank you. I don't have any special thing for giving people stuff if they tip me in chat, but yeah, I will try to live up to the beautifulness of people who are seemingly either you don't believe me that I'm fine, or you're like, you're so sweet that we want to give you extra stuff, and it's like, okay, that's very nice of you. Be sure to take care of yourselves first. Oh, Bo Astrup has a question. Is there an auto pan? I would look to the DAW for that. Like, I'm pretty sure Logic has something like that. I don't currently know how I would get that information in from the DAW. I bet there's a way of doing it, but I don't know where it is. And where is Chris? I'm in Vermont. So let's talk about guitar miking a little bit. Here's the thing. If you've got a guitar cab done nicely in perspective. Excuse me. And here's your speakers. We can give it some more speakers. It's not really that good of a Marshall stack-alike or whatever, but you might be like, okay, put a microphone here or whatever. It depends upon what you're trying to do. Like with some of these old school techniques, they had a mic like sitting way over here, like at some distance. Because back in the day, you weren't supposed to put expensive microphones right up against the speaker, nor did anybody think that made sense. They're like, well, here's the amplifier and the audience sits here, so we should put a microphone over here where the audience is. And it depends upon what kind of miking you're doing with regard to the result that you'll get. Now, if you're doing like heavy metal recording and you're trying to get these big, like stereo rhythm guitars that are, you know, a big chunk of what the whole track is about. That's constantly going to be your thing. You might end up... I just smacked the microphone, didn't I? I've got a compressor on, so it's all good. You might need to take this amplifier and like cut away the grill cloth. I'll draw a picture of that and remove the air in between that Olheim is mentioning. So you're like cutting or tearing away the grill cloth. I have my annoying answering machine going off in my ear again, but you probably didn't hear it. Oh, good. Yay. They are fixing the chimney cap. I'll be returning that call when I can. But that's the important part, is my chimney person, who is currently leaving a message on the answering machine and talking in my ear while I try to talk and do a live stream, which is very inconvenient. They're probably telling me how much it'll cost or whatever. They have agreed to put on a replacement chimney cap that won't let birds in. So I'll be free of the annoyance of, you know, the panic and sheer chaos of having live birds in my house and getting them stuck in the chimney flue and stuff. Because, oh, if anybody remembers from last year or whatever, that stuff tilts me out really hard. And I don't need that stress in my life. So that's really good news. I'll be returning that call as soon as I'm done. Which is to say in like an hour. Whatever. So, miking. If you're doing a heavy metal mic, you might very well be cutting away all of the grill cloth specifically for the purpose of taking your microphone. Do I have a good example? I do. Let me take the microphone off one more time. Wasn't just one bird, there were multiple birds. So I also wonder whether I can find a... Here, I'll be right back. I'm getting a surrogate speakerphone. Might sound kind of weird, but you'll see what I mean. So yeah, I got special effects for demonstrating this. Namely, I'm drawing stuff, but I have a Airwindows SM57. This is a Shure SM57 where I basically just cut away the external part, protecting it and shaped it. I have a video about that as well. And one of the reasons the FM57 works as well as it does is because of this arrangement of holes. It's 7 holes, meaning that at any angle you're at, each hole is letting sound into the diaphragm at a slightly different timing. It's not even, so it's never really quite, they're all slightly different distance if you're off axis. And here's what I went upstairs to get. It is my surrogate speaker cone. What it actually is a light shade, as you can see. for one of those clamp lights with this little thing, but we'll pretend that this is the voice coil. We'll pretend this is a speaker cone and that this is the surround. And we'll be able to do that. So here's the deal as far as miking the cone is concerned. You might consider that the natural thing would be like, here's the cone, therefore, yep. But this is probably not what you want to do. When people mic guitar amplifiers, typically they're going to be on the outside edge of the cone, and it'll get more of a speaker sound unless it's just a grating voice coil spike in the ear kind of sound. Although if that's what you're shooting for, you can do that. You can say also go somewhat off axis. But if you're still lining up perfectly with it, that's not perfectly lined up, but if you're still lining up perfectly with it, speaker high frequencies are extremely directional. So this is firing a beam of highs from the voice coil straight forwards. Tilted, it's going to be much more rolled off. And this is how you doctor the sound that you get off of the speaker, by manipulating stuff using the positioning of the microphone. So there are two ways you can do that. One is you stay on axis and you offset it. So you're, rather than being in the central lobe of the super brightness coming off of it, you're over to the side, you're pointing straight into the speaker in the same way, but you're picking up the edge, or even sort of the surround. You're picking up stuff that's way off on the side. Another thing that you can do is tilt. If you're going super off axis, the sound is still, you're going to get a much sharper fall off of high frequencies if you tilt as well as move off axis. And sometimes that can work by having the microphone on a stand and it's holding it like here, so you could tilt it fairly easily and directly. I mean, the coolest possible way of doing it is if you had some kind of robot or machine so that it could tilt it for you, and that way you could have the whole thing in another room and be listening only to the sound of the microphone. Because if the amp is like right there and being loud and deafening you, you're not going to really be hearing what the monitoring of it was like. So I find with a lot of speakers, or a lot of guitar speakers, that I want to be like a little bit tilted and a little bit off. Like not wildly tilted, but there's going to be a zone. And a guy who is a formative influence with regard to guitar sound stuff, Slipperman, who used to do like podcasts of his own and talk about how you did this sort of thing. He was the one who was like, cut away the speaker grill. Because if you think about it, here's where the speaker is, right? If you have the speaker grill here, you can only put the microphone here. You can put it right up against the speaker grill if you want, but it's not necessarily going to help that much. Nor are you necessarily going to be able to get really in close to the actual diaphragm, because depending upon how loud the amplifier is, you are taking this and also distorting it in its own way. Like, there's a proximity effect. You get more bass for being close up, and it gets really quite exaggerated if you're really close up. And this is not proximity. Like if your speaker grill cloth is here, this is not acceptably proximity. It's just not close enough. So basically you have to get rid of that so that you can get right in on the cone. And there's going to be sound changes based on how close you are to typically the edge of the cone. Yeah, I'll explain that part. Small movements in here, especially within SM57, again, it's Airwindows SM57, but it's a kind of SM57. These zero in on stuff like exactly in front of them with incredible determination and authority. It's a little moving coil microphone, and it takes really high sound pressure levels, and there's a little transformer inside here. So one of the things that happens is you are gain staging how hard the microphone signal is hitting the internal transformer by positioning and how loud your amp is. So it's always possible, and the grill will also cut highs, but that's not really a concern. Like, no matter what you do, you'll be able to get too much highs. It is, all you got to do is sort of be on axis with the voice coil, and you'll have too much highs. So you don't have to worry about cutting highs, although I suppose you could get airy sound out of the raw cone if you've taken the grill away. But getting enough highs out of the guitar speaker close mic'd is typically not your problem. And this is the reason why people mic the outer edge of the cone. The sound right in the middle is going to be way too bright. You don't want to be in a situation where you're miking it and then you have to fix it in EQ. It's up, I have to boost bass, I have to boost mid-range because it sounds like an ice pick, it sounds terrible. And sometimes sounding like an ice pick is good. But in a lot of contexts, if you want stuff to sound natural, normal, like a mic'd electric guitar often does or should, or if you want it to sound more rich and smooth, even though it's a distorted guitar, that is typically what you do. You're miking the outside edge of the cone because high frequencies live in here, the low frequencies are all filled out around here, and there are bell mode resonances. Like, I'm spiking that microphone real good. Bell mode resonances. This is metal, so it actually is a bell. What that means is part of the reason it sounds like a speaker rather than just plain sounding like you plugged the amp into the board is this vibrates. Much like if it was a plate reverb or something, you're driving it in this corner, and then you have basically a paper bell-shaped or cone-shaped reverb unit that dies away really quick, but it has these particular resonances going on. And some of the resonances are like going in and out. Like, you can see where these holes are. You can have a kind of resonance out near the outside edge of the cone where those positions are going in at the same point that the ones next to them, between them, are going out. There's a vibration around the outside edge. This is a light diffuser. And these resonances are part of how the cone is constructed. So if you're miking the outside edge, you're hearing those resonances, the extraneous vibrations that are part of what makes the speaker sound like a speaker, live there, not at the center of the cone. If you close mic just the dust cap, you're getting a raw and colorless sound that's as close as you can get to just DIing the output of the amp, and that's typically not what you're going to want. It's like Jimmy Page putting microphones on guitars at more of a distance, or throwing a couple of microphones up, so that he has a more complicated sound in there. But since we're talking about just a speaker cone, what you get when you're miking the outside edge of the cone, you're miking the resonant areas of the speaker, is that kind of fullness from having like extra reverb, extra vibrations, extra stuff bouncing around, but in the context of it's a piece of cardboard. It's not getting echoey. It's just adding another color. It's a very alive sounding color because it's a physical object vibrating. But, and again, that's why you'd be miking the edge. With miking the edge, you're hearing more of that and less of just the raw sound that's driving that. So that's the way that it moves. If you're right at the center, this is like no cone sound, which is considered bad. If you're using something like a 57, you can close mic stuff. You can really spotlight it. And also note where this positioning is. If I'm in here, the voice coil is now literally over here. It's off axis. Like my finger is there, and mic in the side of the cone, and the voice coil is now about 4 inches away and literally off axis for the SM57, which has really good rejection and really good rejection of high frequencies that far off axis. In fact, it's incredibly good at, you tilt it even a little bit, move it a little bit off axis, and it's spotlighting only the stuff that is super literally in front of it. So you don't have to move it really far. If you do super the edge of the cone, I think John Petrucci, the guy from Dream Theater, I've seen him using micings quite often where it's like his miking is way over here, it's so at the edge of the cone it isn't even funny, because he's doing a madness of musical performance and overplaying, but is not looking for a super harsh, gritty, aggressive kind of sound. He's looking for more your sort of like Journey, Neil Schon smoothness kind of thing, where it fits into the context of a bunch of other stuff that's like, oh, this is very high quality music, this is very slick and good. And that's part of the way you do it, is super edge miking on this speaker. Now, if you're trying to do something like the way, wow, I'm making loud noises today. If you're trying to do something like the way that I am getting my guitar sounds, where they need to have a lot of presence, or you could also say like the way Eddie Van Halen was doing his, though I have not seen his micings, but he was doing stuff where the guitar was really very spotlit and he had a whole concept going on, presumably still does, I think it's still working, whole concept going on about like, and I have to have a bunch of clarity, and I'm taking brightness out of the amp by running it at slightly lower voltage, but then I'm doing all this other stuff as well, and I got to find exactly the right positioning for the mic. What you do is what Slipperman advocated, which is you stick your ear in the speakers enough to where you find the best speaker of, say, the four. And then you start exploring with the microphone all around the speaker to see if anything jumps out as being particularly good. You're listening for like steady state tones, and you're listening for basically chugging. You're going shim, 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 because that is a noisy type effect, like a scraping sound, which is going to highlight certain kinds of tone qualities. And then more steady state chords is where you're going to hear if you're on a bell mode resonance and it's like going a honk at some particular frequency. So you explore. There's no way to cheat on that one. You basically have to move a microphone around because your ear won't do this. It's not as good. Typically in quite close, to the point of almost like touching the speaker close. Assuming that your gain levels are not so high that you must pull it away a little bit. If it's really super thick and heavy and also kind of spitty and sounding like it's distorting, it might be the kind of situation where you need to accept a little bit less upfrontness and pull it away by 1/2 an inch, 3/4 of an inch, something like that. But you basically go around and explore the cone to find what's a good spot in it, much like if you were putting a microphone in a room and finding a good spot in the room for recording something that's being performed in the room. It's the same thing. You're just spotlighting stuff and using, typically if it's a 57, you're using it for this purpose, its ability to handle really high sound pressure levels and also spotlight exactly the bit that you're pointing at and seriously reject anything that you're not pointing at. So it's the microscope work, basically. It's audio microscope work, and you're trying to find whatever is giving you the audio that you want out of it, and then maybe you're nailing it down. It's like, don't touch this microphone. This is perfect. We're going to use this for the entire album. This is the microphone positioning for this album. Slipperman also talked about use of ribbon microphones, which he scoffed at very intensely. And the reason he scoffed at it so intensely is not because of specific things about the ribbon microphone, but more like the idea with the ribbon microphone is like, oh man, it's super forgiving. And he talked about this some, and he favors the 57 because it is capable of doing that incredible spotlighting. Like you literally go within 1/2 an inch of the cone and it'll handle the sound pressure level unless you're too loud, in which case sometimes you might have to either back down the master volume or pull it away a tiny bit or both. But if your gain levels on the amplifier are not so unbearable, it can kind of handle going right up to the speaker, and that gets you extraordinarily powerful proximity effect. And that means you can start dialing in the lows on your like crazy heavy guitar sound, which is super important. If you're doing, say, I'll call this calculator, a ribbon microphone, and the ribbon is here, so you can't talk into it because you'll break the ribbon, and it's bidirectional, so literally off axis has perfect rejection. Look, you can't get it as close to the bit of the cone anymore because it's going to be quite a lot larger than this. And if you're putting it in front of the cone, ribbons have a capacity for getting like really nice smooth highs and handling them very gracefully. More so than condenser microphones, which can tend to be pretty bright, although that's a classic rock guitar miking technique that's often been used, is they were often using like condenser mics rather than the dynamics that guitars ended up using more. When they say forgiving, here's what they mean. There's not going to be nearly as much difference in positioning if it's a ribbon mic and you're like moving it around relative, like you can go to the outside edge, but you know what? The polar pattern of a ribbon mic is not nearly as sharp as the polar pattern of an SM57. This thing can pick up serious highs if you're exactly on axis. And if you're up close to a speaker, a lot of this stuff elsewhere in the speaker is even behind the microphone, or this voice coil, especially if you're tilting it off axis, that voice coil can be literally here relative to the diaphragm. It can be getting lots and lots of rejection. If you have a ribbon microphone and you're directly on axis, yeah, that's fine. But if you're off axis, it's not going to lose nearly as much highs as the 57 loses highs when you go off axis. So if you've got a really bright voice coil in here and you're dead on axis, then yeah, fine, you're getting all of that. If you're going as far as you can get, because they're larger than 57s, to the edge of the cone, notice that off axis is only about 45 degrees different max, And this microphone doesn't lose highs nearly as much when it's off axis. So you got a situation where you can't get much of a difference off of the miking. You can't get it in there close enough, maybe if you tilted it forwards like this. But in general, you can't really get the ribbon microphone in there close enough to be able to micromanage what kind of response you're getting out of the cone. So it's forgiving because it's doing a sort of average result out of what the thing will sound like. And the actual, the driver, the microphone itself, the ribbon microphone itself is really good sounding, but it's going to get you the same thing every time. And that's why they call it forgiving. And there are people who use stuff like that to great effect. Like I think Steve Albini did at least one PJ Harvey album, Rid of Me, and also some Pixies stuff, and likes using ribbon microphones on guitars, so they get this really big, glossy sound, but it's not as upfront, punchy, grinding, textural as you get with like a 57 on a heavy guitar that's like right in somewhere on the cone. So it's sort of horses for courses, really. And then if you're using a condenser mic, that's typically going to be a little bit farther away. So it might not be forgiving in the sense of ribbon microphones make gritty, high-frequency stuff sound good. Instead, a condenser microphone might make gritty, high-frequency stuff sound bad, in which case the speaker putting out this gritty, high-frequency stuff, first of all, the condenser mic can't really reject that as well because it's not, the polar pattern is not as curious as a 57. And then secondly, the microphone is not as forgiving as the ribbon. So you're going to get a certain sound out of a condenser microphone on guitar as well. So yeah, people are chattering about all kinds of stuff. What I'm going to ask is, was that enough information on guitar miking? And I can also show you some things about acoustic guitars if I take this mic off, this mic at least. Actually, I can demonstrate some of these things using this mic rather than just talking into it. So maybe we'll do a little bit of that as well. Let's talk acoustic guitars. Now, miking acoustic guitars is a whole other thing because you get very different stuff out of it. I wonder whether maybe I can... Let's focus a little bit. People will often be like, "Oh, here's where the sound is. The sound comes out of the sound hole." No, not necessarily. I'm going to just strum the guitar because I don't have a stand that can do this in a way where you can hear it. But since this is a guitar, I can show you what some of these things are. So one possibility is miking stuff like around here. You might want to point towards here. Bass tends to come out of the sound hole kind of straight on. My chat is being really annoying today, so you can be less annoying if you want. I'm stuck here with you for another 14... half an hour or so, regardless of how you act. But you can be nicer if you like. I'm trying to help you. So people might think about miking the sound hole because it's like, well, that's where the sound comes out, doesn't it? Which is not necessarily true. And this is where you're going to get low frequencies. And you don't necessarily want that unless you're clear that that's the kind of thing that you're trying to do. Whereas if you mic'd, say, the bridge, you're going to get more bright there. David, I don't smile at jokes like that. Dude, get a grip, man. But another possibility is you can get a very mid-range punchy kind of sound going on. I wonder if I can clip this onto like a water bottle and get a better shot at it. Let's try. Yeah, why would I smile at that? Why would I smile at how would I mic my asshole? Is that meant to be a joke? It's like a different kind of, like I'm a Monty Python guy, that's not my kind of joke. Although they're capable of doing that kind of joke too, honestly, if I'm fair. So let's see, here's our new microphone stand. Actually, here's an even better microphone stand. So, same deal. Move the microphone around and start getting different sounds. Whereas if you're not like right over the sound hole, but there's other options. You don't necessarily have to go straight in there. Here's one that I found, which is much more mid-rangey. You might get an angle kind of going in towards the this part of the body, which is also producing sound. So if we do that, and we'll compare that with the another possibility is again at an angle, but sort of an angle from the top, like if you were playing like this. And that's probably about as much as I need to show you about that. Yes, my crowd are not like old rock and roll engineers over the hill and rotting away. Our crowd are younger people, and they're young and feisty and obnoxious and stuff. And I do actually like that, but you know, if you don't need to know about ever recording an acoustic guitar, I thoroughly understand that. So I'll keep that to a minimum. So Ahmed is asking, why does an SM57 have lesser proximity when it's closer? Well, it doesn't. It has more proximity when it's closer. And that's why you can get more low end out of a speaker by moving it right up to the voice, to the diaphragm of the speaker. The cone, what am I saying? Diaphragm. Diaphragm is in the microphone, cone is in the speaker. That's one of the ways that you can get a really extended low end is get in closer. And that is how that works. So the thing about a 57 is that unlike the condenser microphones, if you have a condenser microphone, we'll pretend that this is one, and you're talking right up close to it, condenser microphones have extremely extended low frequencies. So you get real close to the condenser microphone. That probably sounds interesting too. Check this out. Fun with acoustics. You can probably hear a big difference in the sound on the microphone that I'm recording with if I simply take this one calculator and put it right up against my voice. so that I'm getting a bounce on it. And then it's going to sound like a sort of flangey thing going on because I can move it in and out, and then you're going to hear a slight difference. And that's because microphones hear things differently than our ears do. And if I'm making like my sound come out of here and then also bounce off, I'm positioning it in such a way that it's reflecting sound straight back at this little electric condenser microphone, which is Omni. So in doing this, I am able to make like a certain, especially if I angle it just right, I can make a kind of high frequency flanging sound using just acoustics, using just this one reflective surface. And I noticed that when I started talking into it like it was a large diameter condenser microphone, which I actually have one of those sitting over there too, but it's fine. And hearing that it was reflecting, the sound was reflecting off of it, and it was sounding different even to my ear. Never mind the recording of a real microphone, which does not reconstruct sound from two ears and simulate a sensible result. So condensers in general are going to have a really extended low end. The SM57 simply does not. Like if you get right up on it, you are still getting a really intense proximity effect, but it's got this little diaphragm in here that is, let's see. It's got this little diaphragm in here that is a sort of plastic membrane, and that's not especially loose. It is a sort of cheesy, mid-rangey sounding thing. You can't really get bass out of these. So when you get proximity effect, that's most easily found by like heavy popping and a huge bass boost. But this can't really get bass in the first place, and that's why it seems like it has less proximity. You're getting more of a zeroing in and high end, and you're also getting, I talked about how high frequencies go into the microphone through these little holes, especially high frequencies, because it's like sound's going to bounce off of this plastic surface here, which is so solid that I can like tap it violently and it's not going to hurt the microphone. These are very sturdy. So the only way sound comes in is through these different holes. Now high frequencies are also a let's say that they're going at like the speed of sound. So you got a waveform that's going like this. High frequencies are going to be also a waveform, but it's oscillating much faster. So sound is ripping by like this, and the high frequencies are taking up less space. Now, if you have your microphone here, and it is off axis even slightly, what's going to happen to the sound as it comes in and hits the mic? Well, if it's a low frequency sound, it's going to be sort of peaking out even across the space of the mic. Like an even lower frequency sound might be like that waveform. So you put the microphone here and it's all perfectly on axis. You put the microphone sideways, and this sound has to go through each of these respective holes without canceling out or anything like that. And it's still just all sort of a pressure wave. A wave like this one is also kind of more of a pressure wave. Something tiny like this, if it's off axis, there's going to be like over here, it's going to be a positive. Over here, you're going to have a negative. Stuff will break up very fast because there are these individual holes letting sound in. So you have bright high frequency sounds, and this is also why large diaphragm condenser mics have that sort of spotlighting stuff directly in front of them rather than tilting it, and why stuff like this electret mic and some of these electret mics have incredibly annoying highs because they have so much of them. It's because no matter what angle it is, it's being able to pick up these extremely tiny vibrations in the air. Whereas the 57, if you're dead on, perfectly angled right, which is also going to happen if you're right up on it, because you're asking why is it more on high end. If you're right here, the high end that you're producing is going to go into all of those holes in synchronization. It'll be in phase every time it hits the diaphragm. If you're slightly out of phase, if you're like off axis here, you're not right on the mic, and so you're like, why is this no longer as bright? Partly because you're farther away, partly because if you're at this angle, the frequencies going in there, some of them are going to go into this hole, some of them are going to go into this hole, but that might be a like out of phase from the sound going into this one, because that's such a small waveform that it takes time to get across from the one hole to the other one. So, this part of the diaphragm is going up, this part of the diaphragm is going down. They cancel out. So, hopefully that is some way towards answering that question, because there's a real answer, but it's also a little technical, I think. Move the silly microphone around a little bit more. Kevin is asking for a soften function. I will not add that to AD-Clip 8 because that's not what AD-Clip is about. These plugins don't tend to become each other or merge with each other. It's a and to tape is not a limiter, but it probably is the soften function you're thinking about. The thing is that AD-Clip is not about softening that kind of highs. AD-Clip is about softening clips, especially clips that are extremely bright. There's a technical basis for how that's working, but it's that softened stuff isn't going to get into AD-Clip in that way. Oh gosh, microphones. We've been going on and on about microphones and alien space cats and all manner of stuff. Hope I didn't hurt Pex's feelings too badly. It's like, you're not going to get me to laugh by saying some of these things. I don't really know why you think they're so funny. It's fine. There'll be times. But yeah, it's like, get more human. I don't know what to tell you. And Jolie, I'm not sure if it was actually coronavirus that I got. I'm just saying a bunch of the symptoms kind of line up. And I'm given to understand this was floating around in the United States in January. So it's not that unthinkable. It's just that the way this kind of thing works, there's a lot of it about, and it takes a while sometimes for people to become vulnerable to it. And apparently you can also sit around having gotten over most of it and be feeling basically fine, but still carrying stuff. And that's part of the reason why I'm hanging out at home and tending to reject things that are causing me to go out. And when I do, I'm like, washing my hands and hand sanitizer, which is different from washing your hands. Washing your hands is like about soap, because soap is really good at it. But I'm working to minimize that stuff, because it's like we're still learning how all of that stuff works. And I'm not the expert on that, so I will not pretend to be. So why do real amps not pick up? Well, it depends. If you're a Jesus and Mary chain, or you're using heavily microphonic speakers, then you could have stuff pick up sound over 20. The problem with amps feeding back over 20K is these guitar speakers aren't tweeters. Like, you can get sounds coming out of the voice coil up that high, but these are not tweeters. They're effectively like light they're light honky woofers is basically what guitar speakers are like. It's part of the sound, but they're not really made to make those high frequency sounds. Like, all you need to do to get rid of them is go slightly off axis or go to the outside edge of the cone, and there's nothing there anymore. If you put a tweeter onto a guitar amplifier, you'd probably blow it instantly, but you would certainly get more, you'd be able to get feedback over 20K if your pickup was also feeding back and if the entire signal chain was passing stuff that bright. I've also got a question for my last 10 minutes or so. If people need to hear compression, you don't want to go for Buttercomp or Buttercomp 2. Those are on the sort of uber subtle side. They're still functional. It still does stuff. But you could almost consider that to be like not even in the definition of what compression is. It's a sort of conditioner. It's doing something slightly different. And part of what it's all about, Buttercomp, is not sounding like overt compression. And it's just coloring the sound in a interesting and characteristic way. So basically, if you're talking about Buttercomp or Buttercomp 2, stuff like that, that would be if you were looking for something kind of like curve and recurve. There are points of similarity there, where it's doing a sound conditioning effect, but it's made to not sound like compression as a effect. It's made to not pump and breathe, or even to be able to squish stuff down for special compression effects. I would go for pop, I would go for logical, stuff like that, if you're going for something where it's compression that you can hear and it sounds like the kind of compression that you want. I've also got an alternative, which is Pyewacket. And Pyewacket is a kind of compression that can smush stuff down and make it quieter, but leave the onset transience of things much more, because it's specifically designed to do that. And that has its own uses. In fact, it has uses on stuff like the evergreens that I did, where I was talking about Let It Bleed. I think Olympic might have had Pi compressors handy. And Pyewacket is not a model, but it's shooting for similar qualities as some of those older compressors. A Pi compressor actually is like doing a Class D amplifier thing on it. It's going really quick. And I don't think I can explain that right now. But there are different methods for getting a compressed sound, and they have different behaviors. Like an opto is not going to be the same as a VCA compressor, like an 1176. And the Pi is an entirely different behavior than that. And something like Buttercomp has no parallels in the hardware world. It's doing stuff that's a little more abstract than that. And, the hope is that it finds a use for something that it's useful for, but it's definitely not useful for doing 1176 effects or all buttons in stuff, because it's almost completely opposite of that behavior. Elohim, you're going to have to tell me another 100 times, because I have no idea what that is. And what's more important, a good IR or a good amp sim? I don't know, man. You might try using an IR and using analog distortions to get into the computer and doing your distortion in the analog domain, because that will protect you from a lot of aliasing type stuff that might get in the way. That said, the thing about aliasing is it's possible for people to use that as part of the guitar sound. And I would bring up Meshuggah as an example there, because Meshuggah did some of their coolest songs, at least to my ears, using guitar amp modeling that I thought wasn't even really very good, but it was a very distinctive sound. it's kind of like I'm using synthesizers and filtering them in analog, but some of my synthesizers are the chord organ. Some of my synthesizers are like square waves and triangle waves and things that are being created by a fairly crude digital oscillator. And the reason I'm doing that is because it's a digital oscillator that lets me program in really interesting chord patterns and reactions and give me chords out of it. Because I would like to have analog oscillators for that stuff, but I just can't at this time. I don't have a way of doing it. And what that means is that when I analog filter that stuff, I get a distinctive sound out of it, which is not entirely unpleasant. There's a neat quality about having that work in its way. So that is a argument for perhaps, depending on what you're doing, maybe a bad amp sim will be relevant. Because it's like, the thing with the Meshuggah sounds that I'm talking about is that is just straight up djent. It's straight up djent math metal. And so they have these very complicated time signatures. They have this very complicated stuff going on. And the guitars are really challenging and have to be playing these complicated tight rhythms that hit like a hi-hat, like they hit like a tambourine or something, whatever it is that they're doing with the djent sound. And the pick attack going into a amp simulator and getting super over distorted in that way with all of that aliasing, it turns it into like a high frequency clash. It turns it into like a digital noise effect. And the thing about aliasing is it makes stuff sound more 2D, it makes stuff sound more blocky, it makes stuff like hit harder but let you be able to tune it out a little bit. Like there's sort of less color and more flatness and more like opacity to the sound. It becomes really aggressive and like thin and cheap, and it's not unlike doing sampling off of an old Akai beat maker, something, you know, a 12-bit and, you know, 40K sampling or whatever it is that they had. You wind up with something where, you know, you've sampled the beat, so it's in theory this like drum passage, but it's degraded to the point where it now sounds like a Casio version of that drum passage. So you're not getting any overtones of like, oh, there's the skin of the drum and I feel the shine of the metal of the cymbal, and you're not getting distracted by any of that stuff. Instead, it's just like whack, whack, whack sounds hitting you. And there are these sounds that are colored with all the aliasing that you get to where they're more broadband, like they're more like a white noise source or even a pink noise source, because low frequencies get in there as well. You wind up having more of a clash. You wind up having more aggression and like, I don't know whether I should say intermodulation. It just makes a particular kind of ugliness that's percussive and fills space in a way that really well sculpted sounds with like correct resonances and stuff don't necessarily. You can hear through super good analog tones, like your classic Eddie Van Halen tone or whatever. You can have that cranked up and putting out like loud sound pressure levels, but you could still hear maybe somebody talking through it because it's so well sculpted that you can pick out other stuff going on. Whereas and part of that is like you have resonant qualities that are part of the sound, And then the spaces around the resonant qualities are very free of extraneous noise. Now, when you have the amp sim thing, you're getting all this aliasing, you're getting this nastiness, and that's filling in all the spaces. So you can't get around it. It becomes a solid wall of sound. And if you think of like the sound of Meshuggah or whatever, solid wall of sound is a really good description. You can compose and arrange stuff around like, this is what I'm doing with the guitars. When they're happening, they're a solid wall of sound. Furthermore, when the pick is hitting the string, it's a solid wall of noise. It's or gent. And that's a legitimate effect. So the thing about the, it's a choice whether you want to push for a real amp style sound like your classic rock, whatever, or any variation on that, and have a resonant kind of tone that makes space in the mix. Or whether you want to go for a amp sim kind of thing with a lot of aliasing that takes away space in the mix and just arrange around that. So yeah. And people, as a final note, because it's now like 1:39, it's now 12:41, so I'm going over a little bit, but I always do that. If this is a speaker cone that has to vibrate, you do understand that tweeters are small. This is not small. The reason you're not getting stuff over 10K is it's really hard to make a speaker that goes over 10K. Like even a small general purpose speaker struggles. You need to make drivers that are like an inch or smaller to get way up there. And if you have a big old piece of cardboard that is this big, it should be it's too heavy. It's too big and heavy to vibrate that fast. And that is why you don't get over 10K. The larger it is, the more likely it is that you're going to get low frequencies out of it, and that's good too. The way that I'm doing my subwoofers for my recording is I got 4 12-inch speakers that were relatively cheap and put them in sonotubes facing away from each other so that they were automatically going, canceling out the vibrations. And with that, it's like strictly about cone area being able to cause low frequencies. If I had a single speaker that was this big, I wouldn't be able to make bass as much as that. Speakers will tend to have a sort of bandpass quality around how large they are. So if you have a speaker like this lens cap versus a speaker that's like this is going to give a bandpassy quality. It's like a 10-inch or so that doesn't go quite as low as a 12-inch speaker, like a 12-inch guitar speaker. And it'll go kind of higher than that because the bandpassy quality will be voiced a little bit lower if the driver is much bigger. Whereas if you have a speaker that's literally the size of this, you're not going to get mid-range out of it. It's going to be mostly like incredibly high mid-range and brightness, the high frequency stuff, because it's physically smaller. It'll vibrate faster, but it doesn't have enough cone area to make a loud sound at a low frequency. It's the cone area that moves the air. So if it's only yay big, it can only move this much sort of volume of air for whatever excursion it has. And if this was moving this much, and this was trying to move the same amount of air in a low frequency, like move over here and then displace that much air, this would have to go like way, the travel would have to be enormous, and it would have to be on some kind of piston, otherwise the air would just come around it and fill it. So speakers and microphones are certainly very interesting, and I hope I've answered some of your questions with that stuff. Kevin has a final question. 80 clip with something else controlling levels better. This 80 clip is for catching clips in a particular kind of way. level controlling is not necessarily the same thing as catching clips. In fact, something like 80 clip is you want to not be seeming to alter the levels of things. You want to clip stuff off very cleanly without making any apparent... 'cause limiting is like extra fast compression. So there's a whole spectrum there. You know, slow compression like Buttercomp, where you don't hear it pumping and breathing, or something like Logical, pop is getting a little bit faster. Then you start getting into limiting. I don't think I necessarily have anything super suited to that at the moment. And then you get into clipping, which is happening and bouncing back so fast that you don't have a sense of compression coming out of it at all. So yeah, on that note, I am going to bid you guys goodbye. Guys, I'm kind of tired and I need to rest up. And I will be doing a couple of music jams on Tuesday and Wednesday. One will be beats, and the Wednesday one is going to be ambient. And then I'm going to get together and do my usual Minecraft thing on Wednesday evening. And anybody is welcome to come and play on that, or just hang out and keep me company, I guess, or with whatever I'm doing with blocks. And then if there was anything else that, like, if people really wanted me to live stream so that you could catch up with me, talk to me about that. I could try to set up another date. I'm not going to do it unless people are actually asking for it, but around about now, like, if it's any benefit to people, I can come up with something else to do. But mostly I'm resting up and making sure that I'm staying well. So, on that note, I will say goodbye to chat, and I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.